Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hey, YouTube. Our guest was having some connection issues today, so we're keeping it audio only for this episode. No video this time, so just pop in your earbuds and enjoy the listen. Today, celebrations in Syria and a seismic shift in U.S. foreign policy.
With the support of leaders in this room, and they're great leaders you are, we are currently exploring normalizing relations with Syria's new government.
For the first time in 25 years, a U.S. president sat with a Syrian leader. What changed? And what will this relationship mean for Syrians? I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take.
I never, ever, ever thought that I would see a Syrian president sit down with an American president and shake hands. My name is Imran Khan. I'm a senior correspondent for Al Jazeera English, and I'm currently in Damascus.
Well, Imran, welcome back to The Take. You're in Damascus, and there have been some really, really historic changes there in the past few days that you have gotten a front row seat to. U.S. President Donald Trump and Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa met for the first time in Riyadh, and Trump announced that he is going to be lifting sanctions on Syria.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
This is a big moment politically, but also practically for ordinary Syrians who've been living through war, displacement, and economic collapse for nearly 14 years since the beginning of the Syrian civil war. You've been there for 2 weeks now. What has it been like?
People are almost in a sense of shock that Trump has just gone, yes, we're lifting all of the sanctions. Immediately after the announcement was made, the main square, Umayyad Square, filled up almost immediately with just people out in the streets, the cars honking. It was a party atmosphere. And this is a country that, in the last 6 months have seen a whole lot of historic moments. But this one, I think, like the fall of the Assad regime, this one as well came as a shock to them. They didn't think that this was going to happen. So there's this kind of collective nationwide optimism, giddy optimism, but also that's tempered with shock because no one thought this was coming.
What were you hearing from Syrians there when Trump made this announcement that they were dropping the sanctions?
The language that the Syrians were using was incredible. It was, thank you, Trump. Thank you, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman.
First, we want to thank the KSA and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And of course, we want to thank President Trump.
Big love to Trump.
I love you, Trump. I love you. I love you. I love you.
There was this real gratefulness to the international community that they'd stepped up, they'd recognized that this is a new Syria, and this was the best way forward. We did a piece on, what sanctions actually meant to ordinary people. You carry your cash around because of hyperinflation in plastic bags, not in your wallet, not in a purse, because $100 is if you exchange $100, it's probably about 70 different notes. So that's like that thing. It's a chunk.
So people are just walking around with cash because there's no banking system.
The banking system doesn't work. So they have rucksacks full of cash when they get paid, literal money bags. And remember, this is a country where 90% of people, according to the United Nations, are under the poverty line. So it's not like they're earning lots and lots and lots of money. It's just hyperinflation has meant that the currency is completely devalued. So when we were talking to people a few days earlier, there was this kind of resignation that Syria was never going to become part of the international community because people felt that this was a government that people didn't believe in outside of Syria. And if any change was going to happen, it was going to take years. And then you fast forward a couple of days later after Trump's announcement, and that's why there is this kind of collective nationwide shock, tempered with absolute happiness and optimism.
These sanctions have had a tremendous impact on people's daily lives for a long time. Now, the fall of Bashar al-Assad was certainly a turning point. But this moment with Trump's announcement that the U.S. will lift sanctions on Syria and all these high-level meetings that are happening, really, it really feels like the start of something new there. On Wednesday, al-Sharaa addressed the nation in a pretty momentous speech where he talked about hope and in introducing the world to what he called a new Syria. I know there has to be a lot of rebuilding and recovery that needs to happen. But Imran, tell us about his speech and how it was received.
As soon as the speech finished, there were fireworks in the streets. I was up on the roof of the place I'm staying in, the hotel I'm staying in. The speech was so important because it broke down into three things. The first one was the acknowledgement and thanking Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Turkey and the Americans for taking this bold step. The second part of the speech was making sure that the world understood that this was a Syria for all Syrians. This wasn't going to be the sectarian politics that the regime had played for decades. This was going to be a new chapter. And the third bit of the speech was really pushing the idea that Syria is now open for business. It's open for international investment. It's open to local investment. It's going to be an entrepreneurial state.
Imran, what do you think that this could mean for the country, and its place on the world stage?
It's very funny. I'm laughing because there's two cities that people keep telling me that they want to be like, and it's Dubai and Doha. They're like, we are the next Dubai, we are the next Doha. And if you haven't been to any of those cities, they are, Arab cities that are completely futuristic, very, very modern, gleaming skyscrapers, big wide roads, everything's clean, everything's shiny. And that's the future they're looking forward to. It's going to be a lot of Gulf money that's going to come in. So Qatari money, Saudi Arabian money, it's going to be Turkey as well. But there's going to be a lot of American investment because, let's face it, famously transactional, Donald Trump is sees himself as a businessman. He wants American companies to do really well. He's got this deal. I'm pretty sure that up in al-Sharaa has said we welcome American investment into the country. People are also now talking about they might get American-made cars, particularly when you speak to young people. So, yeah, there is this, like I said, I keep coming back to the word optimism. And I use that word deliberately because the sanctions were supposed to really cripple the government. They were supposed to put pressure on the Assad regime to actually fall, but sanctions never do that.
More with Imran after the break. Imran, let's talk about the man who made all of this possible, Ahmed al-Sharaa. He is the new president of Syria, and what's incredible about him is that he went from being an armed fighter with ties to al-Qaeda, who was imprisoned by the U.S. in Iraq, I guess almost 20 years ago, to a leader of a rebel group that toppled Syria's former President Bashar al-Assad, to now the head of Syria, shaking hands with U.S. President Donald Trump. I mean, talk about a dramatic turn. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about him and how he was able to reverse course?
Well, Ahmed al-Sharaa has been a divisive figure in Syria for a very long time because there were very young Syrian activists who were very secular, who wanted a revolution not based around any kind of particular religion. And then you had, Ahmed al-Sharaa and HTS, which were ideologically driven. They were driven by this idea that they were doing something in the way of God. Their jihad, their holy struggle, as it were, was what was driving them. And no one really kind of thought that this would be the guy. Now, I think if you look at the events of December, when this actually all took place, Sharaa and HTS were left Idlib, and they were hoping to take over much of the Idlib countryside, and that would be it. But the Syrian army simply disappeared, and that allowed them to come into Damascus. And very suddenly, we were hearing that Bashar al-Assad was leaving the country, and so then he takes over. But I think Sharaa realized very, very quickly that if he was going to retain power, he needed to get the international community very, very quickly on side. He approached the Gulf states first, persuaded them that he was going to be the right person to lead Syria through this transition period. He convinced them. MBZ, the Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, was particularly fearful of Sharaa. And after his meeting, the language in the UAE newspapers changed. And it was all about how the leader of the UAE had had a warm meeting and was confident that this man could lead Syria. So he persuaded. Clearly, there was a conversation there that allowed the Gulf states to say, you know what, this guy is worth backing. And they persuaded Donald Trump and the people around him that Syria is worth a shot, and this guy is worth a shot.
I mean, and you see a whole rebrand of his image. I mean, it seems like he made quite a good impression on Donald Trump when they met.
Young, attractive guy, tough guy, strong pass, very strong pass fighter.
Now, there's also reports that Sharaa had been pushing really hard for FaceTime with Trump, and that he came prepared with a pitch tailored to Trump's interests. Imran, what were the promises that he came prepared with, and how central were those promises in making this deal happen?
Well, let's talk about the stuff that we can confirm that we know that happened. There was a meeting between Sharaa and two American businessmen who are said to be close to Donald Trump. In that meeting, he persuaded those two American businessmen that Syria was going to be open for business, that it was going to be open for American business, that Donald Trump would be welcome to build a Trump Tower in Damascus, if that's what it took for the sanctions to be lifted. Now, though, this is where it gets murky, because I'm not going to accuse the American president or these businessmen of doing a quid pro quo deal, a Trump Tower for lifting of sanctions. I think it was probably a lot more subtle than that. But the fact that he was using that language to try and persuade American businessmen that Syria is a safe bet for American business, I think was absolutely crucial. That when Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, said to Donald Trump, "This is my guy and you should trust him," I think maybe Donald Trump took that at face value. It seems par for what Donald Trump does, right?
Yes. And I mean, also from my understanding, when Trump announced that he was going to be dropping the sanctions, there was a very long applause. But also you saw that the Saudi Crown Prince gave a standing ovation to Trump.
That was incredible. I was watching it on television with a bunch of people, journalists and Syrian journalists as well. And when the Crown Prince stood up it was almost like the journalists were going to stand up as well. It was not out of any kind of respect, but just out of sheer shock. Like, what? What's just happened? It was incredible to see. And the smile on Mohammed bin Salman's face said it all, that this was a new Middle East. This was a new resetting of the relationship between America and the Middle East.
So what actually did come out of the meeting for Sharaa? Like, what did Trump say he was going to agree to?
Well, it's an interesting thing. The sanctions lifting was announced roughly 24 hours before they met the next day. In the meeting, it was supposed to be a hello. Now, I've been covering diplomacy for many, many, many years. I've never heard of a hello meeting. And then we found out that the Crown Prince bin Salman was in the meeting, the Turkish leader was in the meeting, Donald Trump was in the meeting, and the meeting lasted 33 minutes. There were several key points that Trump pushed. He said, firstly, that Syria needs to get rid of foreign terrorists, foreign fighters. He calls them foreign terrorists. They need to get rid of Palestinian terrorists. That was his words again. They need to stop the resurgence of the Islamic State in the country. And they also need to take responsibility for the prison camps in northeast Syria that house Islamic State fighters and people that joined the Islamic State. But also, he urged Syria to join the Abraham Accords, which is the normalization deal with Israel.
And that is a very politically charged element here, right? With the possibility of Syria joining the Abraham Accords. And this is this Trump-era normalization deal that saw countries like the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco establish ties with Israel. We don't know if that would happen, but what would that maybe look like?
Well, let's just take a look at the countries that you've just mentioned. None of those countries have actually been at war with Israel. So it's very easy for them to establish diplomatic relations. Syria has been at war with Israel since the foundation of Israel in 1948. In 1967, Israel occupied the Golan Heights and has continued to occupy the Golan Heights. Post-Sharaa taking power, Israel has bombed Syria several times. Never bombed Morocco, never bombed the UAE, but they are bombing military targets in Syria. They did that just 2 weeks ago. This was seen as a violation of Syrian territory by Israel. Sharaa urged the Arab world to come to the aid of Syria in the face of this aggression. So it's one thing to say, yes, let's normalize relations, but these guys are at war. But if you speak to a lot of Syrians who are particularly kind of, under the age of 30, for example, and it is a very young population here, they will tell you that the priorities for them are getting an economy, being able to buy a house, getting a job. And if it takes a leap of faith to be able to do that and recognizing Israel, then let's just do that now. Because eventually we're going to have to do it anyway. That's been said to me by several people, several young people. But then there's the old guard who have been fighting. There's a lot of real world reasons, family reasons, people who have died, soldiers who have died, a collective trauma when it comes to talking about Israel in Syria. And so it's not as simple as getting your pen out and signing the Abraham Accords. However, that's what Donald Trump sees. The flip side to all of this is if there is a strong economy, if there are these jobs, if people are feeling that Syria is becoming a nation that is on the world stage, then signing a peace deal with Israel is going to be a lot easier for Sharaa. But right now, he's got to balance all of that out. And he also has to balance the fact that there are a lot of people in Syria that are very sympathetic, if not outright supportive of the Palestinian cause.
Imran, I want to ask you too. I mean, what would this mean for the Palestinians? I mean, especially the more than 400,000 Palestinian refugees who are currently living in Syria. I mean, would they see that as a betrayal?
I mean, I think yes. If Syria signs the accords, it's going to be very difficult for Ahmed al-Sharaa, firstly, to sell it, and then secondly, to not be looking over his shoulder, because there's a lot of Palestinians in Syria. They're going to be very angry about it. And there's a lot of Syrians that will be very angry about it. And when it comes to an eventual election, he may well find himself out of a job simply because he did that. But we don't know.
Right. Yeah. We don't know if Syria will actually sign on to the Abraham Accords. I mean, this is something that Trump is obviously pushing for. But the language out of the meeting suggests that they're positioning themselves as a player in the region. How much does Syria want to be seen as a force in the region? And Imran, what kind of role do you think they're trying to carve out for themselves?
I think if you look at what Ahmed al-Sharaa has been doing, it's all been about building Syria. It's all been about getting Syria to a point where it has a place on the international stage. It can negotiate. He can go to various capitals around the world and take those meetings with various world leaders. I don't think Syria, certainly by the actions of Sharaa, and certainly by the reading of the tea leaves via the media and sort of all of that sort of stuff, that Syria's overreaching. It doesn't want to be this kind of world, regional power again. I think Syrians have realized that the old capitals of the Arab world, Cairo, Damascus, Tehran, Baghdad, have gone. The new capitals of the Arab world are Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Riyadh, and the Middle East has been reshaped. So I think this isn't about Sharaa putting Damascus back on the world map as a world power. This is about putting Damascus back on the map as a country that just functions.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Noor Wazwaz, Sonia Bhagat, Chloe K. Lee, with Phillip Lanos, Spencer Cline, Ashish Malhotra, Kisaa Zehra, Mariana Navarrete, Remas Alhawari, and me, Natasha Del Toro. It was edited by Kylene Kiang. The Take production team is Marcos Bartolome, Sonia Bhagat, Spencer Cline, Sari El Khalili, Tamara Kandaker, Phillip Lanos, Chloe K. Lee, Ashish Malhotra, Halima Shah, Khaled Sultan, Amy Walters, and Noor Wazwaz. Our editorial interns are Remas Alhawari, Mariana Navarrete, Kingwell Ma, and Kisaa Zehra. I'm your host, Natasha Del Toro. Our engagement producers are Adam Abou-Gad and Vienna Maglio. Aya Al-Malek is lead of audience engagement. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Our video editors are Hisham Abu Salah and Mohamed Al-Melhem. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.